us once again to the urgent realization of just how much there is still left to own. Item 6 on the agenda, the meaning of life. Now, Harry, you've had some thoughts on this?
That's right, yeah. I've had a team working on this over the past few weeks, and what we've come up with can be reduced to two fundamental concepts. One, people are not wearing enough hats. Two, matter is energy. In the universe, there are many energy fields which we cannot normally perceive. Some energies have a spiritual source which act upon a person's soul. However, this soul does not exist ab initio, as Orthodox Christianity teaches. It has to be brought into existence by a process of guided self-observation. However, this is rarely achieved owing to man's unique ability to be distracted from spiritual matters by everyday trivia.
What was that about hats again?
Oh, people aren't wearing enough.
Is this true?
Can I just ask, with reference to your second point, when you say souls don't develop because people become distracted...
What do you make of the Aboriginal Affairs Delwa Touche audit making the rounds in the media today?
It's an attempt to discredit the Attawapiskat First Nation and Chief Spence.
All right, sir. Well, you were the co-manager of Attawapiskat for parts of 2010 and 2011. What were the finances like when you took over?
This particular audit stems from the result of the First Nation being put in third-party management in December of 2011. Obviously, you know, an intervention isn't employed unless there are some issues relative to internal controls and documentation.
Okay, so sir, just to clarify, you were assigned by Aboriginal Affairs then?
It's actually hired by Chief and Council.
You're a bit of a problem, and that the relationship with the Chief is a bit of a problem, and that it taints.
It doesn't matter what our relation, nobody's business.
He has a contract for $850 a day. That household's making close to 300 grand a year. I don't think you can be human and look at those leaky roofs in that cold place without having a pain inside your heart saying, what's wrong? Can someone fix those roofs? And so you're thinking, what's wrong? Maybe more money's the answer.
Chief Theresa Spence has been in the national spotlight for weeks since she began her hunger strike in support of the IdelNoMore movement. Now she's under some scrutiny. An audit shows millions of dollars in undocumented spending on her reserve in Northern Ontario. What are the main findings in this audit?
Yeah, this audit was requested by the federal government. It wanted to ensure that the more than $100 million that was given to Attawapiskat First Nation was spent appropriately on things like housing, sewage, education, things like that.
In the majority of the financial payments made by the brand, there was either no documentation at all or inadequate documentation to prove that the money was spent where it was supposed to. So fairly significant findings that the problems on the reserve, which in part were blamed on heavy staff turnover at the Attawapiskat First Nation and on different ways that entries were made into the systems of their ledgers. But what the audit could not do really was determine whether the money was spent the way it was intended to be.
In the report, what it found was this, that there was little or no documentation for millions of dollars spent. Also, of 505 transactions that the auditing firm looked at, there were only 409. They actually found that 409 lacked proper documentation. So of the 500, more than 400 lacked the proper documentation. That's more than 80%.
You're asked to leave the community and you'll be charged with breach of peace. Please ask you to leave.
But since when do you need consent to go and interview people?
We sent our reporter, Jen Tryon, who was in Attawapiskat about a year ago, back to the Northern Ontario Reserve to talk to residents. She didn't get very far, though. Within minutes of arriving and trying to find the acting chief, she was threatened with arrest.
Now, it didn't take very long between the time we landed in Attawapiskat for us to go to the band council office, try to tell them that we were there, and then to make our way to the hotel before the acting chief was on our hotel door saying that we weren't welcome and that we had to leave or she was going to call the police.
And when you challenged them on why they were asking you to leave, what was the response?
Well, I said, what law are we breaking? We're not disturbing the police. All we've done is check into the hotel.
And do you know, Jen, who gave those orders for you to leave?
Well, we pressed on a little further, and I asked eventually, did Theresa Spence herself call you and tell you that the media had to leave, that we had to leave? And the acting chief said yes.
We're joined now by Senator Patrick Brazeau, an Aboriginal man who's part of the Conservative government. Hey, welcome back to the program, Senator.
Thank you. Just glad to be alive.
You know, this IdelNoMore protest, I disagree with some of their vague goals. It feels sort of like Occupy Wall Street. But I like the fact that it's given us an opportunity to talk about Aboriginal rights and laws and duties and problems in Canada. What do you think?
Well, look, I haven't hidden the fact that, Aboriginal peoples all across this country have very valid claims and concerns with respect to how their issues are being dealt with. But I haven't hid the fact that I don't support the means and manner in which this is being conducted in terms of having protests and having economic disruptions, because at the end of the day, there are many hardworking Canadians and First Nations people who work and pay taxes, which enable a lot of those funds to go to First Nations communities for the benefit of First Nation citizens.
You know, I've been focused really closely on the Attawapiskat ban in Northern Ontario because the chief there, Theresa Spence, has really thrust herself in front of the cameras. I mean, she's camped out in Ottawa where the media is instead of up in Attawapiskat. And the more I look at the Attawapiskat financials and who's getting what gravy and who's not, I think that there is room for an Aboriginal protest, but it's at the local band council offices. It's for more democratic accountability, better governance, better financial management, as I've always said, giving ordinary Indians the same property rights that everyone else has. I think that a lot of this is about channeling and projecting real problems onto people who, well, maybe they can have some role in solving it, but I think Chief Spence probably has as much to answer for as Stephen Harper. What do you think?
Well, I couldn't agree more. I've always said that if IdelNoMore was about eliminating the Indian Act, which is the most racist colonial piece of legislation in the Western world, I would be the first on those front lines to support the movement. However, there are issues such as a lack of accountability on reserves, such as a lack of governance, and giving the power into the hands of grassroots Aboriginal peoples and not the chiefs and band councils. And so we're not hearing any of that. And, you know, I feel that a lot of the IdelNoMore movement is, in effect, a smokescreen because of the accountability legislation in particular that the Conservatives passed that will force band chiefs and councils to disclose their salaries and expenses from this day forward. You know, people could protest all they want, they can jump on any bandwagon all they want, but at the same time, we need to hear the solutions that they have to offer so we can start working together and not just protesting for the sake of protesting. And obviously, you know, this is becoming a highly political protest and it's becoming an anti-conservative one because at the end of the day, there are many governments, both Liberal and Conservatives, past who did a lot of wrongdoings to the Aboriginal peoples, but we are in 2013, and why didn't this protest started when the Liberals were in power for 13 years?
Canada's Prime Minister Stephen Harper announced last Friday that China's state-owned oil company CNOOC would be allowed to buy Nexen. The $15 billion deal gives the Chinese company control over one of Canada's largest oil sands project.
7 years ago, CNOOC dropped a bid for acquiring the U.S. energy company Unocal due to intense political opposition in the U.S.
Now, the Arab awakening has been at the top of the agenda for all of us, but it's hardly alone there. And there are so many other examples I could point to, but the real point here is the world is fast changing. It's going to keep changing, and we will either master that change or be overwhelmed by it. And my intention, working with all of you and with our colleagues at the State Department, is that we master the change, that we're smart enough, nimble enough, agile enough to figure out how to stay ahead of it and to harness it on behalf of the important work we do. We've also at the State Department created new bureaus to deal with 21st century challenges. Our new Bureau of Energy Resources is our single point of contact on all energy issues, including making sure that countries use their own energy resources to actually benefit their own citizens. And we reconceived the role of the Undersecretary for Global Affairs, now known as the Undersecretary for Civilian Security, Democracy, and Human Rights.
Growing concern has been expressed to me about the use of foreign money to really overload the public consultation phase of regulatory hearings just for the purpose of slowing down the process.
They have an agenda, and it seems to be ideologically driven, and it's financed, without exaggeration, by billionaire socialists in the United States.
The Moscow Times reports the United States is closing its Russian office of the Agency for International Development at the request of the Russian government. The Kremlin claims the U.S. is behind widespread protests. U.S. officials say they'll find a new way to promote democracy.
Of course, money from USAID has influenced Russian politics. Without a doubt, NGOs influence public opinion in Russia, and this is normal. That's why they exist, to influence public opinion.
Для этого они работают, общественные организации, чтобы влиять на общественное мнение.